Last we saw Moses, he was standing on a mountain looking at a bush that was on fire but not burning up. God had called him to go to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and ask for God's people to be let to go home. God's people were the tribe of Israel. They were slaves in Egypt, and God wanted them to go home to their land. But Pharaoh didn't want them to go. Our story for today begins with Moses and his brother Aaron going to see Pharaoh to ask him to let God's people go home. What do you think Pharaoh said? So God told Moses to warn Pharaoh that if he did not let the people go home, bad things would happen in Egypt. This happens 10 times. There are 10 different plagues or bad things that happen because Pharaoh won't let the people go. This is how the story goes. God tells Moses to warn Pharaoh that if he doesn't let the people go, the water in the Nile River will turn to blood. Pharaoh says, no. River turns to blood. God tells Moses to warn Pharaoh that if he doesn't let the people go, frogs will invade their homes and palaces. Pharaoh says, no. Frogs are everywhere. God tells Moses to warn Pharaoh that if he doesn't let the people go, lice will appear in the whole land of Egypt. Pharaoh says, no. Lice are everywhere. God tells Moses to warn Pharaoh that if he doesn't let the people go, swarms of insects will fill the homes of the Egyptians. Pharaoh says, no. Insects swarm everywhere. God tells Moses to warn Pharaoh that if he doesn't let the people go, all the livestock, the horses, donkeys, camels, cattle, and flocks, will be hit by a very deadly disease. Pharaoh says, no. All the Egyptian livestock died. God tells Moses to warn Pharaoh that if he doesn't let the people go, skin sores and blisters will appear on all the Egyptian people. Pharaoh says, no. All the Egyptians were covered with sores. God tells Moses to warn Pharaoh that if he doesn't let the people go, a terrible hail and thunderstorm will destroy all their crops, so they would run out of food. Pharaoh says no. Hail destroyed all the food. God tells Moses to warn Pharaoh that if he doesn't let the people go, swarms of locusts will fill the land and eat every remaining plant. Pharaoh says no. Locusts filled the land so much people couldn't even see the ground. God tells Moses to warn Pharaoh that if he doesn't let the people go, darkness would spread over all of Egypt for 3 days. Pharaoh said no. People couldn't walk outside for 3 days because it was so dark. Finally, God tells Moses to warn Pharaoh about the last and worst thing. God says that at midnight, every oldest child in the land of Egypt would die, including Pharaoh's oldest son. Pharaoh said no. And all the oldest children died in Egypt, except for the children of the Israelites. God kept them safe, and death passed over their homes. And then God tells Moses to ask Pharaoh one more time to let the people go home. And Pharaoh says, "Get out of here." And Moses led the entire tribe of Israel out, and they began their journey back home. I know that was kind of a funny way to tell that story, but I want to be sure to say this. The plagues were really sad for the Egyptians. They lost everything: animals, safety, comfort, even their own children. God made these sad things happen to them because their king, the Pharaoh, wouldn't do what God wanted, wouldn't release God's people from slavery. If Pharaoh had listened earlier, then the people wouldn't have had all these bad things happen. I also want to say this. When sad things happen in our own lives, it's not because God is punishing us. It's not because God is making those things happen so that somebody somewhere will release God's people from slavery. Take COVID, for instance. It has been really sad in many different ways. God is not making that happen so that we can change. Sometimes sad things just happen. The last thing I want to say is this. God is powerful. God can make rivers turn to blood and frogs invade a country. But God's power is on your side. We learn from Jesus that God is loving. God's power is with you, working for you to help wherever it can. So this is a story about God helping people when life is bad, like the Israelites who were in slavery. And this is a story about God's power, like how God made the 10 plagues happen. Next week, we'll finish this part of the story of Moses. It turns out that Pharaoh changes his mind, and so the people of God, the Israelites, have to run for their lives. You'll have to watch next week to find out what happens. Before that, take a look at the 2 printout pages for this week. The first is a copy of the story that you can use with your parents to help retell the story. Have your parents read the story and you can follow along and do the motions and act out the story, and maybe they can even record you and send it to me as you act out the story. The second printout page is actually something you've seen already. It's a coloring page of Moses and Aaron asking Pharaoh to let the people go. You've seen my coloring page. Now I'd love to see your coloring page. Take a picture and send it to me. And finally, click this box to learn a song called Pharaoh, Pharaoh that I learned at church camp many years ago. See you next week.